Ratchet & Clank is 20 years old today, and if I'm honest, I have no idea what to think about that. Anniversaries, birthdays, they're supposed to be happy, right? They're joyful, something to celebrate. We mark the momentous occasion that things we care about entered into this world. People, events, releases, even our own relationships. And certainly, I care about this game series. You don't spend countless days wrangling together an almost hour-long video on a topic you don't have some kind of passion for. I guess unless you're Doug Walker, but clearly, this means something to me, so why? On this day, when it turns 20 years old, do I find myself at such a loss for words? I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I don't have a very strong attachment to this specific game. The series, okay, sure, and its immediate sequels, yeah, definitely. But this game, I've only ever played it, maybe once or twice? Never as it originally released, and so the product that released on the 4th of November 2002, the anniversary that we're quote-unquote celebrating, there's not a lot I could say about it. I mean, I guess that's not entirely true. I could research its development, I could analyse its game design, but I don't want to. Many have done that before me, and many will do that after me. Probably including me. So instead, I want to look at some more specific elements of these games. So, if you were hoping for a more broad discussion of the series on its 20th anniversary, I apologise, because you're about to witness a discussion about the franchise itself, speedrunning, and my own videos, so let's get fucking started then, shall we, eh? 20 years is a long time for an IP to live for, especially one from this era of game dev. Ratchet & Clank, as a franchise, is something that Sony likes to use to sell stuff, is really the only in-house face from the PS2 that's still around today. The thing is, though, looking at this first game, celebrating 20 years of it existing, has made me think about what this franchise actually has to do with this product, what Ratchet & Clank has to do with Ratchet & Clank for the PS2. Ratchet & Clank is an action platformer centered around the buddy cop dynamic of Ratchet, a working class mechanic who is disillusioned with the world and so whose only goal is to fuck about.
You see all the cool gadgets they're making? Let's go get some!
And Clank, a naive optimist who's trying to save the world from the people who made him by informing the washed-up hero and obvious dickhead Captain Quark,
the name's Steve. Pleased to meet you.
Of the evil plans of Chairman Drek, CEO and also obvious dickhead.
Using highly sophisticated technology, which you couldn't possibly understand.
And how they grow together to better each other, Ratchet learning to give a shit, and Clank learning to be less dumb as rocks.
Well, I find the fact that he has a spring where his leg should be to be quite puzzling.
And why do you think that is?
Possibly an injury incurred while battling evil?
This isn't the real Captain Quark, you numbskull. It's a robot.
Oh.
Thematically, the game is about a hyper-capitalist, consumeristic society where the main draw of the game is purchasing weapons to creatively use in strategic fights from a military arms manufacturer who also dabble in racing events.
You have to be with the company for 2 years before the employee discount kicks in.
With an equally strong focus on platforming challenges using a variety of gadgets. If you've never played the first game and are wondering what the fuck is going on, I don't blame you. Ratchet & Clank, as it is now, is a third-person shooter about a lot of stuff, where the main draw is upgrading your large arsenal of weapons by making your enemies explode in the most violent ways a PG game can render. I don't want to imply that that's a bad thing. Sure, I prefer the PS2 era of Ratchet & Clank, but I don't hold the fact that the future games, or the games after, are different against them. That's not to say I don't think that they're less cohesive, but the fact that they aren't like these first games is not the issue. Because, really, how could they be? Ratchet & Clank is very much a product of its time in gameplay and tone, even in its production. The thing about the game development industry in the early 2000s is that it was big enough to make large-scale 3D games like this, but not quite at the point where it is now, where ideas are getting filtered through hundreds of people. It wasn't as tightly knit as the development of the early and mid-90s, where direction was often clear and strong, but an individual's ideas could still shine through, and it was much easier to keep a project thematically cohesive, especially when the big industry traps developed in the 7th and 8th console generations, stuff like skill trees and unnecessary open worlds only occupied by filler, hadn't been invented yet. It's where the game's tone comes from as well. Back in the 2000s, the industry didn't take itself quite as seriously. That, again, was a 7th gen construct, the age of self-serious, piss-coloured first-person shooters, and the series had to adapt alongside it. The future duology takes itself much more seriously than the games that preceded it, if not out of an act of will to adapt, then certainly by necessity. Obviously there's still plenty of less serious elements, but the overall tone of the stories is much more sincere, which means the light-hearted, cynical tone, if that makes sense, that the original games had can't get carried over without structurally breaking. The premises of these games are inherently silly, and they use that fact to satirize the elements of those premises, the corporations you use or work for, the media, etc. When your game is about going on a mission to steal back an experimental pet from a megacorporation, you have a lot more material to work with when it comes to writing satire about our capitalist society, much less so than when your game is about finding and rescuing your kidnapped best friend as he learns about his role in the universe. You see what I mean here? The reason that newer Ratchet & Clank doesn't feel like old Ratchet & Clank isn't some lost magic. It's just a product of the times that these games were developed in. And that isn't to discredit all criticism, by the way. Just because I don't think that the tonal shift is a problem, doesn't mean I think that these games don't have problems. So, yes, although the series is much different than when it debuted 20 years ago, that fact is only natural. I'm sure you're not the same person that you were 20 years ago. That's pretty much my entire fucking lifetime, so of course it's gonna be different. But that's enough of my rambling analysis. It's time we talked about something a little more fun. Ratchet & Clank is a good game. Some might even say great, and I would definitely say that about its sequels. But do you know what these games actually are? They're the greatest speed games to have ever been made. I first got into speedrunning these games around 2018. For those in the community, it was about 6 months or so before Ouya began its switch to the PS3, and my god, it is so much fun. I don't run anymore. In fact, I didn't even really run that much. It was pretty sporadic throughout about a year or so, but I did keep up with the scene for a long while, even when I wasn't actively running. Most people in the community probably don't remember me. I was quite quiet and also not good. And I imagine that if you do, it's probably as that guy that Zem raided once and then got a PB in Rack 2 NG+. What you probably will have noticed is that my footage of these games can barely go a second without using some kind of speed tech. You know, once you've learnt the side flips, you can never not use the side flips, or the million different variations on each of the different pieces of speed tech. The funny thing is, none of this is intended, and I don't just mean that you aren't intended to move this way, that you're exploiting bugs in the movement system, but that the whole idea of these games having advanced movement is asinine. Long jump, high jump, glide, and dash are all very common movement abilities, and they're just supposed to make getting around easier. Really, the charge boots are completely optional, only being created to navigate the large crystal gathering sections, and the helipack and the thruster pack movement is for very specific platforming sections, even less so as the series progresses, to the point where they're completely axed in the 4th game. The movement in these games has no business being as good as it is, and approachable as well. It certainly takes a lot of practice and skill, but given how much jargon is thrown around in the community, it's amazing just how easy it is to catch on. Look, I'm aware this shit can look like goddamn witchcraft, but it'll all make sense remarkably quickly. Movement is baked into everything that you do, and typically sequence breaking is not done due to some random bug that's difficult to explain, but rather just because your expanded moveset can outmaneuver obstacles. Of course, there are some instances of weird trickery, stuff like Quark Warp, Quid Exploit, IMG, whatever the fuck ILJs are, but for the most part, it makes sense. You can look at a run of Quark's Hideout or Crash Site, and even if you don't know what a neutral long jump or a whip jump is, the way that the level is being skipped reads loud and clear. It's also just fun. Momentum-based gameplay is always interesting, and that's what 90% of the speed tech in the quadrilogy is. Weird shit with momentum preservation. It's difficult, or at least more challenging than normal movement, for lack of a better term, but getting it right is so satisfying. Even if you don't plan on speedrunning these games, which a lot of you probably aren't, I mean that's fine, I don't run them anymore either, I do not have the patience for it. You should definitely take the time to learn even just some of the basic movement. You don't need the more complex and isolated tech. ILJs and infinite jumps and slingshot proxies are cool to know about, but probably aren't going to impact you if you don't actively run the games. The more simple stuff, like neutral cancels and side flips, they're not that difficult and they make moving around so much fun. Seriously, go look at all of the footage of me playing these games. I haven't run them in like 4 years, and I'm still using this stuff, because it's just so enjoyable. I didn't mean for this section to be so, preachy, so I guess the last thing I'll say is that I'll use my like, comment, subscribe call to action to instead ask that you have a look into Ratchet & Clank speedrunning, or even just have a look at some runs, maybe a GDQ if you want people to explain what they're doing. It's super cool. Wait, that kind of makes it seem like this is the end of the video. It's not even close, and if you thought that was personal, it's time to get really personal. In a large part, I owe the success of these videos to this game series. Videos about Ratchet & Clank are why you people subscribe, why you stay and watch. Your viewership clearly dictates that. When something unrelated does well, it's either capitalizing on a trending topic, or it's tangentially related. The main reason you people are here is because of these games. Which is cool, right? To share this interest with thousands of people, but it's also a lot less fun than you might think. I am, in a sense, weighed down by this franchise, because as you'll probably be shocked to discover, I have other interests outside of these games. I have so many videos I want to make about a whole range of topics, even outside of the space of gaming, but there's always the thought in the back of my mind that all people want is more videos on Ratchet & Clank. I'm sure that you, individually, don't mind when I do something different. I don't doubt that, but as a collective, you most certainly do. Many Ratchet & Clank videos, it feels like I'm almost making them to hit a quota. Of course, they're still topics that interest me, but there's a part of them that almost feels forced out. And I would not be surprised to find that there's people at Insomniac Games who feel the same way about making these games. I have to imagine that was part of the reason, even if small, for the 5-year gap between 2016 and Rift Apart, because the studio just wanted to work on some other stuff for a change. I certainly don't blame them, even if I've made comments that might seem like that from time to time. I think fans of stuff don't quite realize how much power they have over the creators of the things that they love, how much their opinions, what they want and what they don't enjoy, worms its way into the back of our minds. We're constantly assessing if what we make is what others want to see, if it's up to their standards, will they like something new, or do they just want more of the same? It's a constant weight on your creative soul. It's why I don't often look at myself as a fan of the things that I enjoy. Certainly I grow attached to things as any fan would. It's more that I just try not to impose my wants and desires on the people who actually make them. I try to look at games not based on what I want them to be, but rather what they're trying to be, from what I perceive to be their direction, and analyze whether or not they achieve those goals, and how other projects could utilize those lessons. It's why I appreciate a strong vision so much, why I enjoy something like Metroid Fusion, but aren't nearly as sold on Metroid Dread. And yes, I don't always succeed. My bias does make its way into my videos. My review of Rift Apart should be a testament to that fact. And that's also not to say that opinions are bad. That'd be fucking stupid. Just that there's a difference between I do or don't like this, and you should do this because I do or don't like this. That's also different from this is good and this is bad, but we've already strayed too far off topic, and we really don't have time for a discussion on subjective and objective quality. Now that I've reminded you that we're completely off topic, the question you may rightfully be asking is, how the fuck does this relate to the 20th anniversary of Ratchet & Clank? Which is a good point. Well, following from my talk about the franchise not being what it was years ago, I'm sure that many people would look at the 20 years of the series' history and wish that some things were different, that they stuck to their original tone, that they didn't burn themselves out with yearly releases, that they didn't make that fucking movie. But I want you to stop that. Ratchet & Clank is not going to be the series it was in the early 2000s. It's not going to be the series it was in the late 2000s or the early 2010s, and that's okay. I love this series, and a lot of my character was built directly from it. My creative passions, my worldview, how I appreciate stuff that's scrappier than stuff that's perfect, how I love learning about how things get made. I owe a lot of that directly to these games. That's what I choose to celebrate, not some legacy, not the fact that it managed to survive for this long, and it's also why I don't mind it having changed so much. I would enjoy them developing games more along the lines of Going Commando or A Crack in Time, but they should only do that if they want to. 20 years ago, a fantastic game was released, and that's all that matters. Ratchet & Clank and its immediate sequels are the games that defined my childhood. And really, all I have left to say is to the people that made these games, thank you. And that's what 90% of the speed tech in the quadrilogy is. It's a difficult word to say, quadrilogy. Because you got trilogy, quadrilogy, pentology. Like, pentology is... But they did a fifth game. Pentology is so much easier to say. So, yes. Although the series, it's much... God damn it, shit. If you're wondering why the lighting and my hair and everything for this shot seems to change, it's because I've had to do this one close-up shot like 3 times. First time it was out of focus, second time I forgot to record the last part of the script. So now I have to do it now. It's a different day. Luckily I left the camera set up, otherwise I would be screaming right now. To the people that made these games, thank you. I'm gonna stop the shot. I don't know if you can actually hear that, because this is blocking out a lot of noise. That's a really fucking loud plane. Spraying lead on me.